Annette Levesque, it is so great to see you on Paper Napkin Wisdom. Welcome and thank you for joining me here.
Thank you so much, Govin. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, not as bad as I am. So you've shared an interesting napkin and you drew on it 3 times, which is great. Uh, while technology drives innovation, human connection is the key to success. We are human centric. Why did you share that with
Well, I think in my career as an educator and as an educator who's been technology focused, I've lived through many, many, many phases of innovation from moving to us even just moving to the internet, which I know, oof, way back when, to now looking at AI. And I've seen many types of innovations launched in corporations and schools and universities and colleges. And whenever we fail to balance human connection or forget the human connection part of the equation, because technology can do such fabulous things, it usually ends up in some form of colossal failure. So that's my napkin. Don't judge the artwork.
No, the artwork's fabulous. Light bulb, key, and people. It's fantastic. But so for people who don't know, I mean, I say this in the intro, but you founded one of the world's first, and in fact, maybe the first completely virtual accredited private high school in the world, right? I mean, and so you're telling me in the middle of this virtual high school innovation, you're saying technology drives the innovation, but human, like live human people, is the key to success. Was that a surprise to you along the way? Like, did you think that you were going to be able to get rid of more people? I mean, that's the fear, right? When people are going virtual and adopting technology, that people are going to step to the side of technology. Is that what you thought?
Well, I think when you're pioneering in anything, and especially education, when you're pioneering beyond the scope of research and available data for learning theories, everything was a surprise. And I myself am very equally balanced between loving to engage with people, but I really love that quiet time and work efficiently in quiet time. And so when we launched virtual learning, we were trying to step it up from that old school correspondence model where people used to have, booklets mailed home to them and they didn't know who the instructor was. And it just had such a high incompletion rate and failure rate. And we were trying to reach students in a different way. If they were an athlete and perhaps wanted to leave school and weren't studying, or able to study in person all the time, provide them with another option. And it was a great discovery to us because back then there was no Zoom. We were using Skype for teachers' office hours to hop in occasionally. And over time, we discovered that when there was a complete lack of connection, because we were trying to balance obviously a lot of time zones and people in different places. And we thought, well, hey, that's great. Let's just try to launch all of this asynchronously where people are not connecting necessarily in real time. And we discovered that the less interaction that occurred in a course, the greater the incompletion rates. And the data was you didn't have to chase the data. It was glaring, Govin.
So, so I mean, that probably that surprising sort of revelation that the people were really important to, the connection with people was really important to it, must have really changed the model. But what did it change for you? Like, because I think for all of us, when we're innovating in a certain direction, you need to pivot. So how did that change the way you had to think about the business or your idea?
Well, we had to get really creative because we didn't have all of the tools available now at that time as to how and when we were going to try to drive different types of connection with students. And in various organizations, we launched actually a second school where we were driving a hybrid model. So for international students, instead of working directly with students, we tried to partner with a school that could provide some element of on-site support to learners. And I actually encourage corporations to do that today because even if we have an opportunity to establish a connection with someone initially when we first meet them, it completely changes how you interact afterwards. And, the level of interaction and interrupted connection that you require while you're learning, it depends on your location, your age, your motivation, what's your reason for going. And we started to discover all of these things and create those if then statements and when and how should connection occur.
So how did that influence or inform the way you thought about your team, right? Like, I mean, I think maybe, and look, this is now a reality everywhere. People are, you say the word hybrid, and people are have hybrid workforces and hybrid teams, and the connection with people is harder and harder. You were at the beginning of this, so how did that inform how you built your team, and what are some lessons learned from that?
Well, we definitely made the shift to no longer watching the clock. And a lot of what I'm hearing back from organizations today that are struggling with remote workers that don't necessarily want to come back full time and they're wanting to work from home and they never did before with COVID, there's always a concern of, well, we're here every day and that's what producing looks like. And for some roles, it's not required. So even 20 years ago, I quickly realized because I had the experience of working in a school, in an office, with filing cabinets, separating the teachers, trying to build, a very focused activity, online courses amongst all of this activity. And I negotiated with the principal at that time and basically said, look, I'll build for you, but you need to give me 1 or 2 days that I can work from home quietly because this just can't get done here. And I produced. So there was no question about that. So in my own teams, looking at those connection models, everyone had 20 years ago one remote day working from home. And when, people ask me, well, aren't you concerned that they're, off on a Friday to the cottage and maybe they're not producing? And my response was, I don't care. If they're able to produce the results I require, maybe they needed a more of a rest day. Maybe they needed 4 days where they were going full tilt, and that's a recharge day for when they come in on Mondays. I started to focus less on the time clock and more on results. If they can reproduce and they're producing for the team in the meeting and getting it done, I don't need to clock it.
I love this idea of less on the clock and more on results. But did that shift like the onus to you to be really clear about the results that you were looking for, really consistent about that? What did that do about changing your mindset? Like, what did you have to do that?
We really had to build accountability within the team, not just to me, but to the team as a whole. So, once a week we had that meeting as a team. We timed the meeting actually where everyone was producing. What was their commitment for the week? Where were we moving forward? Because we were very project based. We were pioneers, so all we did was build things and build into our new learning solutions. And then they would report to the team on any obstacles they encountered, what they produced or they didn't, and sometimes things would happen and people couldn't produce. And we've all had that feeling where when you're having to be accountable into a group, it's not a great feeling if you didn't produce that week. And so ultimately, I think the trust that I showed in my team, trust was a huge factor. And the fact that we were a team, very rarely did we ever have problems with one of our staff members not producing. And they really appreciated that remote day from home. Nobody had it. It was pre-COVID.
Yeah. So talk about how those meetings came together. Like, it's trust the team. You know, the idea of trusting a team. A lot of people get kind of squirrely about this, right? They say, no, no, they got to show me before I trust them, right? They got to show me results. I'll give them this much trust on their task, and then give them more and more. How did you run trust? Like, how did you do that? How did you build? How did you give trust to the team?
Mhm. Well, I think by establishing the remote working days right from the very beginning, and we had lots of lovely visual charts on what our goals were, and just providing that experience. I started with trust. It wasn't a case of you have to earn it, it's you've earned it. I don't trust you blindly, but you earn it until it's lost. And I think I can think of maybe 1 or 2 occasions, maybe in my 20-year career, where someone consistently could not, meet the team where the team was at and could not fulfill their obligations. But that's like any general team. You could be clocking it and have team members like that. And so, I love Jim Collins about having your A players on the bus. And I really, really believe in that. So I think if you keep an A team, and it really forces you to when you're working this way, you don't have someone who's in a situation where they can't fulfill or they can't level up like the rest of the team, because it sucks from your whole team, right? If that's happening.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I like so the way I'm hearing is that you trusted first, but you're also very clear with visual cues on where you're going, what needs to be accomplished. You're clear and consistent on the communication structure around how we talk about that accountability too, right? That there was a structure to those meetings, and I think that's really important for people to hear. So I like how you kept on coming back to I don't care about the clock. You didn't care about the clock. So what if you had one of these A performers, that was getting everything done and they needed to work a different way? Were you open-minded to that? Were you open to be flexible about how you worked even back then when there wasn't a lot of flexibility and that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. If I felt like it was someone who could produce for us and keep the team moving forward towards our pioneering goals, we had a conversation before hiring anyone, whether it was an employee on site or a contract worker for a specific project that we were bringing in. We would have those conversations about what do you need? How will this impact the team? Can we do that? And I was completely open-minded to alternative solutions as long as that person could produce. And I think that that really inspires trust in people. And 20 years ago as well, it's not like you could just, go to another organization and have those same opportunities. Right off the bat, when we had staff starting, we would start them with 4 weeks holidays a year, not the usual week or 2 weeks. It was here are our goals. Here's where you fit in the tier of our goals and the strategic plan. If you don't fulfill your part, the whole team can't move forward in the goals. And here's how rest and relaxation and recharging looks like in our organization.
No, it's amazing. I mean, I'm always blown away when I speak with you about how pioneering you are, and not just in the business that you operated in. I mean, going to a virtual school 20 years ago, and then a pandemic occurring 20 years later that had everybody going to virtual school. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about how far ahead you were of the curve and the first completely virtual accredited high school. But there's also something else. I mean, you are a female entrepreneur in a tech business in a different era. What was there? You know, what was the advantage? I mean, obviously, you've made that a significant advantage. You've never stepped back from any challenge. Talk about that challenge. How did you face it? What was the opportunity there?
It was extremely challenging as a female entrepreneur working in international countries where the role of women can be completely different. And at times, I found myself having to, I say we all have a moral compass. And as women, you have a compass in the Canadian culture as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I would travel to some places to work with students who were destined for arranged marriages or students who would not have the same opportunities. And of course, I wanted that for everyone, female students, male students alike in any given culture. And I had to realize pretty quickly that if I went in there wearing my Canadian, this is the way it works hat, I wouldn't be able to affect change at all. So, I was always kind of questioning. I would often leave different situations. I've had situations where I've had CEOs welcome me with a car, a hotel, come train us, and then ask me if I would serve somebody at the table. I didn't bite my tongue well on that one. I'm so sorry. I think I said something like, "I don't think he's very far from the food. I think he'll be okay." But, you know, for those kinds of things, when you're living in a North American country with the rights and freedoms that we have, you don't necessarily expect to have those things happen to be able to do what you do. There were other occasions, there were years, if it was a year that it was a more tiring year where I didn't have as much energy. Maybe life was going on where I would actually just hire someone else internationally to deal with those situations. If I didn't have it going on, there's years you thrive and years you survive in this. And I definitely did that as well. But
Sounds like you were really good at knowing when your energy was low and you needed support and you asked for help. Um, Tell me about how you learned that lesson. Was that something you were just always gifted with? I mean, did you always just know your limits, or was that something you learned?
I think it's something we learn over time. I definitely learned it over time. I mean, I invest in a lot of time in self-actualization, and I'm just a curious George, I think, all the time anyway, about everything. I'm listening and reading and devouring everything I can get my hands on. I love to learn from masters and others as to what they're doing for good health and good energy. And I just naturally love to work. Well, I think everybody does in an awesome environment, and I think that's part of the reason why we constructed our teams the way we did. Because, if you have one person whose energy is really, really low, and you're not accommodating that in a team environment, when they leave, some of the rest of our energy kind of goes with them. And
Mhm.
so I really wanted to nurture that in myself. And some of it, I think there's years we do better at it than others, and we learn from life experience.
So, okay, let's go back to this idea where you had this idea of a virtual school. Technology was going to be, this virtual accreditation. You're using tools like Skype, and for people who don't understand what Skype is, it's FaceTime before there was FaceTime, and it was really rudimentary. It was, think about dial-up FaceTime. That's what it was, for lack of a better word. So you were using these tools that you sort of bungee corded together to make into a platform that did what you did, but then you took it internationally. Right? You took it to places where children and women were in need of education and not getting it. So you've eliminated the technology barrier, but what's the human barrier to connect to those people, to those children and women who need education but aren't getting it, meaning their community isn't providing it for them? So how do you get into those communities and start providing education?
Well, for the most part, I think initially they found me, usually from a connection in Toronto, and were inquiring because they really didn't have access. There was only one way to access education, and it was whatever was offered within a local country, or you needed to be able to fork up, $30,000 US and attend one of the country's premium private schools. And so when we initially came in, we were something in between, but we knew we couldn't do it alone, that we needed to have partnerships with, government. I remember doing a project, a not-for-profit project with the Afghan school project in Afghanistan, and we had to send textbooks with the military. We didn't have ebooks then. We didn't know how to get them there, but we were constantly pivoting really and looking at what do we have? What do you do with a country full of citizens that don't have documentation? And I have to meet the mandate of the Ministry of Education to provide evidence of ID and date of birth, but they don't know when they were born. What do we do? And so I think, being innovative and being pioneers, we would ask things like, well, what does the government do when you have refugees come in? Like, what do they accept to start these processes? So you really have to take each country on an individual basis. Each one was a project on an individual basis. I would go work there for a month to find out. We don't know what we don't know. So, and discover things like, hey, there's no grass for 50 miles and around this location. Any of our environmental science projects, like or activities, they're going to need to change. So, a little bit of boots in the ground and a lot with partners.
When you have this sort of approach that keeps on coming up over and over again, like something didn't work, and you ask a bunch of questions and find out why before saying no, right? Like you don't quit on things. Um, where does that come from? What's the heart of that?
I don't know, just always I've always had a drive, I think, when I've got a goal and when I think something can be done, when I want to create something, there's times we hit walls and we jump back from them, and sometimes it takes a pause, but I've always, always, always looked for the path around and followed that and had problem solving, I think, in my nature to get to that end destination. And very often the journey doesn't look like what you thought it would look like, but and I've tried to instill that, in my teams and learners and my own kids as well too, that you really just need to keep going. What does that look like? Keep going. And we hit massive roadblocks when we were pioneering this. I mean, it was e-learning was persona non grata back then. The government didn't want it. Other teachers teaching traditional classrooms that might lose a section to a virtual learning, and they didn't want it. But parents and students and learners were banging down my door for it, and it was really helping people. It was really helping to increase access for students who might not have that. And to your question, learners in other countries, women trying to access education in other countries, they faced a whole host of barriers that we don't see here, from daily obligations to financial responsibility. There were some women trying to go to school that weren't allowed to leave the house without being escorted by a male, a father, or a cousin. So we really had to take each situation and say, all right, well, what can we do in this situation? How can we work with it? What are our resources? What do we have? What are the tools we have? And what do we need?
Yeah. So when you have I like this, when you have a goal, you just didn't quit on it. But it sounds like your goal comes from this like deep down sense of purpose. And this purpose, your purpose, and I wonder if this has something to do with your napkin in that, like your purpose, you use technology as a solution, but the connection to people, that's what you hunted for all the time. Like people were always the answer along the way, whether it's the military bringing textbooks to your students, whether it's a different form of educator or boots on the ground, like you talked about in terms of learning. Is that where it came from? Like your need to be connected with the people and your purpose, your passion
I
to
think I've
bring education
always
to people?
been Yeah, I think I've always been curious about people. I'm kind of this balance. When they do the testing to see if you're people driven or task driven, I actually tested a little bit more task driven. But I love to hear the stories of people, and I love to help people, and
Yeah.
I'm curious about their purpose. And I think that, technology can provide us with data driven insights that can help us make fabulous decisions, and it can accelerate innovation and do all kinds of wonderful things, but there's things it can't tell us that we can only learn from people and other people's experiences. And so those are two different types of, and very important types of knowledge, that we need to ultimately create solutions that people are going to find useful and that they are going to find helpful, especially if they're coming from a different geographic region, a different culture. I can't possibly empathize as to what a woman living in South Africa, what does her day look like for her? What does her work day look like? And I don't think ChatGPT could ultimately give me her stories in any kind of depth. So I think we
So
need both.
yeah, so what's the role of AI in all of this then to you? Like how does AI play into, creating human-centric connections that are the key?
I don't know if AI creates the human centric connection. I think that it can supplement the other things that we need to do and accelerate the other things we need to do, like processing of data, research and development. I think of it as very advanced back then, or way back when it was the calculator we were all very excited about, or the first PC, that it could process data and it can provide insights on a whole nother level. But ultimately, it is a machine and it doesn't have the capability of emotional intelligence. We talk about when a fire alarm goes off in a school, AI is not going to be able to help you get the students out the door. You still require a human to do that. So I think that, we do require connection, interaction, ultimately accountability with others to pursue our goals and move forward. And we need to be able to learn from others. And AI can support that, but it is a data driven machine.
Mhm. So, one of the fun things that you just said was, talked about calculators, right? And I remember, maybe I'm tipping my head as to my vintage, but I remember when calculators were seen as being an enemy, right? Like you can't learn math if you have a calculator. You need to do multiplication tables, and we did it repetitively. And now it's evolved, and calculators are everywhere, and the calculators are on your phone. I mean, and people, there's some teachers that say, hey, you don't need to know this stuff. You can use tools to know this stuff. And there's other teachers that say, no, you need to know the stuff and then use the tool. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I think that there's a level of core competencies that we absolutely need to develop within our population. And it has to do with critical thinking and problem solving as well. So,
Mhm.
in our youth, it's great that we can use a calculator to calculate fast equations in math. It's also great that I can figure out if it was wrong about something. And I also think that the insights you derive from any type of data, they are much richer and much greater if you've had experiences and the early learning experiences yourself. Now, that's not to say, don't give me a scientific calculator, Govin, and getting into med calculations, but and that's a huge discussion I'm having with schools right now is looking at, depending on the age of your learners, what are some of the core competencies we want to make sure that we have before we start using AI, and it will ultimately enhance everything that we can do.
What do you think about these things in an education setting? I'm holding my cell phone. There's a lot of controversy right now. In some jurisdictions, they're now saying in high school and secondary school environments that learners are not going to be allowed to bring their cell phones into the classroom. What do you think about that?
I I think that, there's a lot of fun and awesome things we can do with our cell phones. I think that, again, depending on the age of the learners, younger learners, I'm not a psychologist, but there's many things that can influence the development of their brain, their attention spans, their focus. I know as an adult, I often have to shut mine off if I want to not be distracted. And, there's just so many different bells and whistles going off on these all the time. I think students miss out on a lot in the classroom if they're constantly distracted by their cell phone. So I think, you have to look at it on a case by case basis. What are we learning, and do we need it? In other cultures, for instance, they may not have computers, and the only way they connect to the internet might be by mobile phone. So that's a consideration. But I think overall, and they're saying about us as well with our human brains, that being connected to technology 24/7 all the time, it's not really great for us, and it doesn't necessarily enhance our learning. It can actually detract from it.
Yeah. So let's just human centric, right? If human connection is the key to success, what are some things in an increasingly virtual world that you think that we need to do, or that you've observed that you need to do to make sure you're staying actually connected to humans?
Well, things like turning my cell phone off when a lot of times people will contact me and say, I haven't heard back from you in a day or two. And it's because I absolutely 100% give my attention to whoever I'm with. Looking at, when are our cell phone times, and when do we need to be connected and when should we not be connected? I do things like build exercise into my day, things that are good and healthy for my brain, and taking care of those things as well.
So taking care of your own human self along the way,
My
and not.
own human self, exactly, making sure that I'm eating healthy, that I'm getting, that built-in activity, that I'm socializing as well. There were times when I was writing my book of and that people were like, "Hey, are you coming up for air soon? We haven't seen you on the golf course." So there's an ebb and flow to life, but I mean, ultimately, I think for anyone, if you spend all of your time 24/7 connected to technology, your body's going to start to revolt, your brain will start to revolt, and you'll start to feel not so great.
I think it's really amazing. And this, the revelation. I mean, you're a tech innovator. You innovated at the front end of the virtual education movement. I mean, you were the icebreaker in this movement, and now, and all along, your observation has been that people and human connection is the key, and that's the part that you made sure was part of your organization and is part of your life. I think it's a powerful lesson for us all. Thank you for joining me, Annette. I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much, Govin. I really, really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.